In the heart of Wyoming's Lamar Valley, a family inherited more than land. They inherited a legend, a 2,000-pound guardian with a scarred eye and a memory that refuses to forget. This is Barron. This is the Broken Compass Ranch, and this is where their story begins. Welcome to Bison Echoes. They say time erases all tracks, but in the Lamar Valley, Montana, time has horns, weighs a ton, and never forgets the face of a friend. This is the story of how a family inherited more than land. They inherited a legend, and his name was Barron. Jack Miller hadn't been to the Broken Compass Ranch in 15 years, not since the day he told his father, Silas, that he was leaving for the city, that he wanted spreadsheets, not saddles, clean hands, not calluses, a future he could control with numbers and logic, not weather and instinct. Silas hadn't argued. He just looked at his son with those quiet, knowing eyes and said, "The valley will be here when you're ready to come back." Jack never thought he'd have to come back, not like this. The heart attack took Silas on a Tuesday morning in late October. He'd been fixing a fence post, the coroner said, quick and quiet, just like the man himself. By the time a neighbor found him 3 hours later, he was already gone. The bison had gathered around his body in a circle like they were standing guard. Barron, the largest of them all, stood closest, his massive head lowered, refusing to let anyone approach until the sheriff himself arrived. Now, 3 weeks later, Jack stood at the gate of the Broken Compass with his wife, Liz, and their 16-year-old daughter, Maya. The November wind cut across the valley like a blade, carrying the scent of sage, pine, and something ancient, something wild and untamed that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The ranch looked smaller than he remembered, but somehow more imposing. The main house, a 2-story log structure his great-grandfather had built in 1947, needed paint. The barn leaned slightly to the left, its red paint faded to rust. Fences sagged in places, wire and wood surrendering to decades of Montana winters. But beyond all that, beyond the obvious decay and neglect, the land itself was breathtaking. 200 acres of pristine valley, surrounded by mountains that turned purple in the afternoon light, meadows where wildflowers would bloom in spring, creek beds where water ran cold and clear from mountain snowmelt. And somewhere out there beyond the ridge Jack could see from the driveway was the herd, 30 American bison, living as their ancestors had for thousands of years. "This is insane," Maya said, for what must have been the 20th time since they'd left Denver. She stood beside the truck, arms crossed, her dark hair whipping in the wind. "We're not ranchers, Dad. You're an accountant. Mom works in marketing. I have school. We have lives in Denver, real lives." Jack said nothing because deep down he knew she was right. He knew nothing about running a ranch. The closest he'd come to livestock was ordering a steak. The last time he'd ridden a horse was at summer camp when he was 12. But the lawyer had been clear. Silas had left everything to Jack. The land, the house, the equipment, the debts, which were substantial, and the herd. All of it. No conditions, no strings. Just a handwritten note tucked into the will that said, "The valley takes care of those who take care of it. Barron will show you the way." Jack had read that line a dozen times, trying to understand what his father meant.
Baron will show you the way." His father had always spoken about Baron differently than the other bison, with a kind of reverence even. In the few phone calls they'd had over the years, Silas would mention Baron like you'd mention an old friend. Baron led the herd to higher ground before the storm hit. Baron broke through the ice to get to the young one who'd fallen in. Jack had always assumed his father was just being sentimental about an animal he'd raised. Now, standing here, he wasn't so sure.
The neighbor arrived the next morning on a mud-splattered ATV, the engine's growl announcing his presence long before he pulled into the driveway. His name was Clayton Webb, a man in his 60s with a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen too many Montana winters. He wore a Carhartt jacket, dusty jeans, and boots that looked older than Jack. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You planning on keeping the herd?" Clayton asked, standing in the driveway with his hat in his hands. His voice had the flat, matter-of-fact tone of someone delivering bad news. Jack nodded. "That's the plan, at least until we figure out what we're doing. Eventually, we'll probably sell 'em once we sort through Dad's estate." Clayton's jaw tightened. He looked out toward the ridge where the bison grazed, invisible from here, but somehow present in the way the land felt. Then he spat into the dirt and looked back at Jack. "Then you need to understand something about bison, and you especially need to understand something about Baron." The way he said the name made Jack's stomach tighten. Liz stepped closer, and even Maya, who'd been scrolling through her phone on the porch, looked up. "Bison aren't cattle," Clayton began, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher delivering a lesson that could save your life. "They're not domesticated. They're not predictable. They're 1,000 kilograms of pure instinct, muscle, and power wrapped in fur. They can run 40 miles an hour, faster than any horse over short distances. They can jump 6 feet straight up from a standstill. They can hook you with those horns and toss a full-grown man like a rag doll." He paused, letting that sink in. "If they decide you're a threat to them, to their calves, to their territory, they'll charge. And when a bison charges, you don't outrun it, you don't fight it. You just pray you're close enough to something solid to get behind." Maya had put her phone down completely now. "So they're dangerous." "They're wild," Clayton corrected. "There's a difference. Respect 'em, understand 'em, give 'em space, and you'll be fine, most of the time." He shifted his weight, and Jack noticed he was favoring his right leg. "But Baron is different." "Different how?" asked Jack. Clayton walked to his ATV and pointed at the passenger side. The metal was crushed inward, a massive dent that looked like something hit it with the force of a small car. "That," Clayton said, "happened 3 years ago. I was helping your father move the herd to a different pasture. I got out of the ATV to open a gate, got maybe 20 feet from Baron. He was just standing there, chewing grass, looking peaceful. And then, like someone flipped a switch, he charged." Clayton's hand unconsciously went to his leg. "Broke my femur in 2 places, crushed 3 ribs. I spent 6 weeks in the hospital. I got lucky because your father was there. He stepped between me and Baron, and that bull stopped on a dime. Just stopped, like Silas had some kind of invisible leash on him." Liz's face had gone pale. "And you're saying this animal is still here, on our property?" "He's the alpha," Clayton said. "He's been with your father since he was a calf. Silas raised him by hand after his mother died, bottle-fed him, spent hours with him every single day. They had a bond I've never seen between a man and a wild animal.
Barron would follow Silas like a dog, would come when he called, would let him touch him, scratch behind his ears, even lean against him. Then maybe he's not dangerous, Maya said, hopefully. If your grandfather, Clayton interrupted gently but firmly, was the only person on earth who could get near Barron. Not me, not the vet when we needed to check the herd, not even the ranch hands who'd been here for years. Barron tolerated them from a distance, but if anyone got close, he'd charge every single time. He looked directly at Jack. After Silas died, we tried to check on the herd. Barron stood at the fence line for 3 days straight. Didn't eat, didn't drink, just stood there staring at the house like he was waiting for your father to come back. When I tried to approach with food and water, he charged the fence so hard he nearly broke through. The image formed in Jack's mind, that massive creature standing vigil, mourning in the only way he knew how. "So what are we supposed to do?" Jack asked. "We can't just leave him out there unsupervised." Clayton put his hat back on. "You've got options. You can sell the herd. Plenty of ranchers would buy 'em, but you won't get much, and it'll take time to arrange. You can hire experienced handlers, but they'll want hazard pay for dealing with Barron. Or," he paused, "you can try what your father did. Learn 'em, understand 'em, earn their trust. And if we can't?" Clayton's silence was answer enough. Eventually, he said, "Barron you might have to put down. No buyer's going to want a bull that aggressive. It's not safe. For you, for anyone who works here, for anyone who might wander onto the property." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Put down. Kill the animal his father had raised from a calf, had loved like a son almost, the creature that had mourned at his grave. "There has to be another way," Jack said quietly. Clayton looked at him with something like pity. "Maybe. Your father found it, but it took him 20 years, and I don't know if that connection can be rebuilt or if it died with him." He climbed onto his ATV, started the engine. Before he drove away, he called back over the noise. "One more thing. Barron's got a scar right here." He pointed to the left side of his face, near his eye. "Lightning strike when he was 3 years old. Nearly killed him. Your father sat with him for 2 days straight, nursing him. That bull never forgot. And Bison, they got memories like elephants. They remember kindness, but they also remember threats." Then he was gone, the sound of the ATV fading into the distance, leaving the Miller family standing in the driveway with a decision they weren't ready to make.
Jack spent the next 3 days reading everything he could find about bison management. YouTube videos, ranching forums, academic papers from wildlife biologists. He learned about herd dynamics, grazing patterns, mineral requirements, and fencing specifications. He learned that American bison, were the largest land mammals in North America, that they'd once numbered in the tens of millions, darkening the plains like a living sea before they were hunted nearly to extinction in the 1800s. That every bison alive today descended from a population of less than 1,000 survivors. He learned that they were intelligent, social, fiercely protective of their young, that the herds had complex hierarchies with dominant bulls ruling through a combination of size, age, and sheer presence. What he didn't learn was how to handle Barron. On the 4th day, Jack decided to try the modern approach. He rented a top-of-the-line ATV from town, newer and more powerful than Clayton's old machine, and spent the morning studying topographic maps of the property. His plan was simple.
Use the ATV to move the herd from their current grazing area to a pasture closer to the house where they'd be easier to monitor. Keep his distance, make noise to get them moving, use the vehicle as a barrier between himself and the animals. Safe, logical, efficient. Maya watched him check the ATV that afternoon, her expression skeptical. She'd spent the last few days exploring the ranch on foot, discovering her grandfather's world. She'd read her grandfather's journals in the study, decades of observations about the herd, the weather, the land. She'd read about Barron, about how Silas had found him as a days-old calf, his mother dead from complications during birth, about how he'd carried the tiny 50-pound animal to the barn in his arms and spent the next 3 months bottle-feeding him every 4 hours. "This is gonna go bad," Maya told her mother as Jack put on his helmet and gloves. "Your father knows what he's doing," Liz said, who'd been trying to remain optimistic. Maya just shook her head and went back inside. The pasture was a mile from the house, accessible by a dirt road that wound through stands of cottonwood and aspen. Jack drove slowly, his confidence growing with each passing minute. This wasn't so hard. He knew the theory. He had the right equipment. He'd watched enough videos to understand the basics. He crested a small rise and saw them. The herd was spread across maybe 10 acres of golden grassland, grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. Massive, dark shapes against the pale grass, prehistoric and powerful. Jack counted 28 visible. 2 must be over the next hill. Cows, calves, younger bulls, all of them calm, beautiful, existing in a rhythm that predated everything humanity had built. And there, slightly apart from the others, standing like a monument at the highest point of the pasture, was Barron. Jack had seen pictures, had seen his father's descriptions in the journals, but nothing prepared him for the reality. Barron was enormous, not just big, enormous. His shoulders were taller than Jack's head would be if he was standing next to him. His head was the size of a truck's hood, crowned with horns that curved out and up, black and sharp. The scar Clayton had mentioned was clearly visible even from this distance, a pale line cutting through the dark fur beside his left eye. But it was the way he stood that struck Jack most, the absolute stillness, the sense of presence that radiated from him like heat. He wasn't just an animal, he was a force, a living embodiment of everything wild and untamable about this land. And he was staring directly at Jack. Jack's hands tightened on the handlebars. "Okay, easy. Keep your distance. Just get them moving toward the other pasture, nice and slow." He revved the engine, not loud, just enough to get their attention, and started moving parallel to the herd, about 100 yards out. The response was immediate. The younger animals looked up, alert. A few cows moved closer to their calves. The bulls shifted, nervous energy rippling through the group. But Barron didn't move. Jack continued, trying to angle them gently toward the open gate a quarter-mile away. Most of the herd started drifting in that direction, heads up, watching him but not panicking. But Barron still didn't move. Jack got braver. He drove a little closer, closing the distance to maybe 70 yards. The engine noise seemed louder out here, more aggressive than he'd intended. The herd broke. It happened like an explosion. One moment they were nervous but contained. The next they were running, 30 bison, each weighing nearly a ton, moving like a stampede from an old Western film. Dust rose in choking clouds. The ground literally shook. Calves struggled to keep up with their mothers. The younger bulls ran with their heads down, pure panic driving them. But Barron didn't run. Barron turned. Jack saw it happen in slow motion. That massive head swinging towards him, those dark eyes locking on to the ATV, the pawing of the front hoof, once, twice, sending up sprays of dirt. And then Barron lowered his head and charged. People talk about fight or flight, about how time slows in moments of extreme danger. Jack experienced all of it in the space of maybe 3 seconds. Barron covered the 70 yards between them in what felt like a heartbeat. One moment he was distant, the next he was right there, a freight train of fur and horn and fury, bearing down on the ATV like it was a personal insult to his existence. Jack tried to turn, tried to gun the engine and get out of the way, but he was too slow, the ATV was too cumbersome, and Barron was too fast. The impact sounded like a car crash. The front of the ATV crumpled like aluminum foil. The handlebars were ripped from Jack's grip. He felt himself flying, actually flying through the air, time stretching impossibly as the blue Montana sky spun around him. He hit the ground hard enough to knock every ounce of air from his lungs. His vision went white, then black, then returned in fragments. Pain radiated from his left side. Something was wrong with his shoulder. He tried to breathe and couldn't. And then Barron was there, standing over him, close enough that Jack could see every detail. The dark, intelligent eyes, the scar tissue pale against black fur, the breath coming from massive nostrils in clouds of steam, the horns that could end his life with a single downward thrust. Jack couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think clearly through the pain and the terror. This is how I die, killed by my father's animal, in the same valley where he died. Barron stared at him, not with the blank gaze of an animal acting on instinct, but with something that looked almost like thought, like recognition, like he was making a decision. Then, slowly, Barron raised his head, snorted once, a sound like a locomotive releasing steam, full of disdain and warning, and turned away. He walked back to where the herd had regrouped, leaving the destroyed ATV and the broken man behind. The other bison parted for him, and he took his place at the highest point again, standing guard, watching, waiting.
Jack lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Eventually, the ability to breathe returned in painful gasps. He managed to roll onto his side, then slowly, agonizingly, to his hands and knees. Nothing was broken, he checked, moving each limb carefully, but everything hurt. His shoulder was badly bruised. His ribs felt like someone had kicked him. His pride was completely shattered. The walk back to the house took 40 minutes. He had to stop every few hundred feet, catching his breath, fighting waves of nausea. By the time he stumbled into the driveway, Liz was running toward him, Maya close behind. "Oh my God, Jack, what happened?" He told him, leaving out how terrified he'd been, how he'd thought he was going to die, how Barron had stood over him and made the conscious choice to let him live. The doctor in town, a woman who looked too young to have a medical degree, but who examined him with calm efficiency, confirmed no fractures, but warned him about internal bleeding, told him to rest, gave him pain medication,
made him promise to come back if anything felt worse. That night Jack sat in his father's study, now his study, he supposed, staring at the journal Smile had found. His body ached. His ego ached worse. He'd been here less than a week and had already proved Clayton right. He had no business trying to run this ranch, no business trying to manage these animals, no business thinking he could somehow continue what his father had spent a lifetime building. Around midnight, unable to sleep, Jack wandered into the barn. It was a massive structure, built to withstand Montana winters, with hay storage above and equipment storage below. Moonlight streamed through gaps in the walls, creating patterns on the concrete floor. His father's tools were everywhere, each one hung precisely on pegboards or stored in labeled drawers. Silas had been meticulous, organized in a way that his father had inherited, but applied to spreadsheets instead of wrenches. There was something comforting about seeing his father's system, understanding how his mind had worked. In the back corner, near the door that led to the pastures, Jack found what looked like a mud room. Hooks on the wall for coats and jackets, boots lined up below, a small bench for sitting while you pulled 'em on. And there, on the last hook, was his father's work jacket. Jack lifted it down slowly, like it might dissolve if he moved too fast. Heavy canvas, faded from dark green to something almost gray blue. The collar was frayed. The cuffs were stained with what looked like motor oil and dirt and blood from a dozen minor injuries. The elbows had been patched with darker material. It smelled like his father. That hit Jack harder than Barron's charge had. The scent brought everything back, memories he'd buried under 15 years of distance and resentment and stubborn pride. His father teaching him to tie knots when he was 6, his father's hand on his shoulder the day Jack graduated high school, his father's face when Jack announced he was leaving, that quiet look of disappointment he'd never quite been able to forget. Jack put on the jacket. It was too big, hung loose on his shoulders, the sleeves extending past his wrists, but it felt right somehow, like putting on armor, like carrying his father with him.
He stepped outside to close the barn door he'd left open. The November night was crystal clear, the kind of clarity you only did in high mountain valleys. The moon was 3 days past full, bright enough to read by. Frost was already forming on the grass, each blade outlined in silver. The temperature had dropped to maybe 20 degrees, his breath coming out in clouds that hung in the still air. The valley was silent, except for the distant sound of the creek and the closer sound of something moving through the grass. Jack turned and saw him. Barron, emerging from the darkness beyond the fence line like something from mythology, massive and impossible and real, walking straight toward where Jack stood frozen by the barn door. Every instinct screamed at Jack to run, to get inside, to put something solid between himself and this creature that had nearly killed him hours before. His shoulder throbbed where he'd landed, his ribs ached with each breath, but he couldn't move. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was pain medication, maybe it was something about the moonlight and the frost and the smell of his father's jacket surrounding him like a ghost. Barron walked closer, 50 feet, 40, 30. His hooves made no sound on the frozen ground, but Jack could feel each step like a small earthquake. 20 feet, 10, and then Barron stopped. They stood there, man and beast, separated by maybe 8 feet of moonlit air. Barron's breath came out in great clouds. His eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes, studied Jack with an intensity that was almost human. Jack's heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. His hands trembled. Every muscle was tense for flight, even though he knew he'd never make it to the door if Barron decided to charge. But Barron didn't charge. Instead, slowly, carefully, that massive bull lowered his head and took one step closer, and inhaled. He was smelling the jacket, smelling Silas, the scent of sweat and earth and wood smoke that had soaked into the fabric over years of wear. The smell of the man who had raised him, saved him, loved him. Barron's eyes closed, his breathing deepened, and for a moment, just a moment, that fearsome guardian of the plains was a calf again, safe in the arms of the only human who'd ever understood him. Jack's hand moved without conscious thought, trembling, slow, giving Barron every opportunity to pull back or strike. His fingers extended toward that scarred face. The fur was coarser than he expected, thick and warm even in the freezing air. He felt the heat of Barron's body, the incredible strength contained in that massive frame. His fingers found the scar Clayton mentioned, the pale line of tissue where lightning had nearly ended this creature's life. Barron opened his eyes but didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just stood there, allowing this stranger who smelled like Silas to touch him. They stayed like that for a long moment, man and beast, connected by the ghost of someone they'd both loved, connected by grief and memory and something neither of them fully understood. Then Barron pulled back, slowly, deliberately. He held Jack's gaze for another heartbeat, and then he turned and walked away, back into the darkness beyond the fence, back to the herd that was his responsibility. Jack stood there, shaking, his hands still raised like he was reaching for something just beyond his grasp. The jacket suddenly felt heavy on his shoulders, weighted with responsibility and legacy and the ghost of his father's expectations. In that moment, Jack understood. The ranch wasn't empty. Silas was still here, in the wind, in the frost, in the memory of an animal who refused to forget. Barron wasn't just a bison. He was a keeper of echoes, a guardian of a bond that death could not break, a living connection to everything Silas had built and loved and protected. And somehow, impossibly, Jack had just been accepted into that sacred trust.
Jack didn't go inside right away. He stood there in the cold, watching the place where Barron had disappeared, trying to process what had just happened. He'd been touched by the wild, not conquered it, not tamed it, but been accepted by it, if only for a moment, been judged and found worthy, or at least worthy enough not to kill. It was Liz who finally found him, coming out in her robe and boots, worried when she'd woken up and found him gone. "Jack, what are you doing out here? You're freezing." He turned to her, and she must have seen something in his face because she stopped, her expression shifting from concern to wonder. "I touched him," Jack said quietly. His voice sounded strange in the still night air. "Barron, he came right up to me. He let me touch him." Liz came closer, pulling her robe tighter against the cold. "What? How is that possible? Clayton said—" "Dad's jacket. He smelled it, recognized it, and he remembered. They stood together, husband and wife, in the moonlit yard of a ranch they'd inherited and didn't know how to run. Around them, the Montana night hummed with invisible life. Somewhere in the darkness, a herd of bison grazing under the watchful eye of their guardian. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the rest of the world continued on, unaware of the small miracle that had just occurred. "So what does this mean? What do we do now?" Liz asked. Jack thought about that, about Barron, about his father, about the legacy he'd run from, and the responsibility that caught up with him. We stay, we learn, we figure it out. You don't know anything about running a ranch? No, but Dad left us Barron, and maybe Barron can teach us what we need to know. Liz studied her husband's face in the moonlight, saw the determination there, the fear, yes, but also something else, purpose maybe, or the beginning of it. Maya's not going to like this. Maya will adapt. She's tougher than she thinks. And your job, our house in Denver? I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Liz nodded slowly. Then she took his hand and led him back toward the house. Come on, you need to sleep. Tomorrow we'll start making plans. But as they walked, Jack noticed something that made him stop. There, in the frost-covered driveway, were tire tracks, fresh ones, the frost not yet reformed where the tires had crushed it, leading from the road up to the gate of the main pasture, then turning around and heading back out. "What is it?" Liz asked. Jack knelt down, touching the tracks. They were from a large vehicle, truck or SUV, wide tires, deep treads, the kind of vehicle someone who worked in the oil and gas industry might drive, or a corporate rancher, or someone was here, Jack said, tonight while we were inside. Who would come out here in the middle of the night? Liz asked. Jack stood up, looking toward the pasture where Barron stood guard. I don't know, but they came right up to the fence, close enough to see the herd. Maybe it was Clayton checking on us? Clayton would have knocked, would have called first. Jack pulled out his phone, snapped a photo of the tracks. These are fresh, maybe an hour old. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Someone had been watching, had driven onto their property in the dark, had looked at the herd, at Barron, and then left without announcing themselves. Why?
Jack thought about his father's debts, about the offers to buy the ranch that the lawyer had mentioned, offers Silas had refused for years, about the way Clayton had said, nobody's gonna want a bull that aggressive, like he was trying to convince Jack of something. And he thought about Barron, standing at that fence line, watching, always watching. What was he guarding? What did someone want badly enough to trespass in the middle of the night? Jack didn't mention his suspicions to Liz, not yet. She was already worried enough about their decision to stay. But as they walked back to the house, he made a mental note to call the county sheriff in the morning, to ask about property security, to find out if anyone else in the valley had been having problems with trespassers. Inside, Maya was standing in the kitchen, glass of water in hand, watching them through the window. "You were outside for a long time," she said when they came in. "Couldn't sleep," Jack replied. Maya looked at the jacket he was wearing, recognition flickering across her face. "That's Grandpa's." "Yeah. Did it help with Barron?" Jack met his daughter's eyes. Smart kid. She'd figured out more than he gave her credit for. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It helped." Maya nodded,
something shifting in her expression. She was still angry about being pulled away from Denver, from her friends and her school and her horses. But maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see what her grandfather had seen in this place. I've been reading his journals, Grandpa's. He wrote about Barron almost every day. Did you know Barron saved his life once? There was a wildfire, and Grandpa got cut off from the house. Barron led him through the smoke to a creek bed, stayed with him until the fire passed. Jack didn't know that, didn't know a lot of things about his father's life out here. What else did he write? Jack asked. Maya hesitated. Then she said, he wrote that Barron understood things, like really understood them, not just instinct. He could tell when something was wrong, when someone had bad intentions. Grandpa called him the Judge of the Valley. The Judge of the Valley, standing at the fence line tonight, watching those tire tracks appear, judging whoever had driven onto the property at midnight. Get some sleep, Jack told Maya. We've got a lot to figure out tomorrow. After Maya went to bed, Jack sat in his father's study, his study now, and opened the most recent journal. Silas's handwriting was cramped and efficient, observations mixed with weather reports and financial notes. But 3 pages from the end, he found an entry that made his blood run cold. They came again today. Same black SUV, same 2 men in suits. Offered me triple what the land is worth. When I refused, they asked about Barron, asked if he was dangerous, asked if he'd ever hurt anyone. I told him he was loyal to me and would protect the herd with his life. They didn't like that answer. I saw it in their eyes. They're not interested in the land for ranching. They want what's under it, and Barron is the only thing standing in their way. The entry was dated 2 weeks before Silas died. Jack sat back, the journal heavy in his hands. What was under the land? Minerals? Oil? Natural gas? Montana was rich in all of it, and with the right geological survey, someone could make millions. But you couldn't extract resources from land you didn't own. Couldn't drill or mine or frack on property that belonged to someone else, unless that someone died, unless their heir couldn't afford to keep the ranch, unless circumstances forced a sale. Jack thought about his father's heart attack, sudden, unexpected, a healthy 65-year-old man dropping dead while fixing a fence. He thought about Barron standing guard over the body, refusing to let anyone approach, and he thought about the tire tracks in the frost leading right up to the fence line where Barron's herd grazed. Someone was watching, someone was waiting, and Barron knew it. Jack stood up and walked to the window. Out there in the darkness the valley slept, but somewhere in that darkness Barron stood watch, the judge of the valley, the guardian of echoes, the keeper of his father's legacy. And now, whether Jack was ready for it or not, he was part of that legacy too. The question wasn't whether they could keep the ranch. The question was, what was Barron guarding that someone else wanted badly enough to trespass, to pressure, to possibly worse? And how far would Jack go to protect it?
The next morning, Jack woke before dawn. His body still ached from yesterday's impact, but something had changed. He put on his father's jacket, which he decided would be his jacket now, and walked out to the barn. The valley was gray in the pre-dawn light, the mountains black silhouettes against a sky just beginning to turn pink. Frost covered everything, and his breath came out in clouds. He didn't go to the pasture, didn't try to approach the herd, just stood there at the fence line and waited. 5 minutes passed, 10, and then he saw movement. Barron, emerging from the herd, walking across the frozen ground with that same deliberate, powerful grace. He stopped at the fence, maybe 20 feet from where Jack stood. They looked at each other, man and beast, inheritor and guardian. Barron snorted once, a sound that could have been greeting or warning or both. Then he turned and walked back to the herd. But he'd acknowledged Jack, had come to the fence to see him, had given him something, recognition maybe, or a test, or the beginning of understanding. Jack smiled for the first time since his father died. "Okay, old man," he said quietly to the ghost of Silas that seemed to linger in the cold air. "I'll stay. I'll learn. I'll protect what you built." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and pine and earth. Somewhere in the distance, the creek ran over rocks that had been there for millennia. The mountains caught the first rays of sun and turned from black to purple to gold. And in the valley, a herd of bison grazed under the watchful eye of their guardian, while a city accountant in a faded canvas jacket tried to figure out how to become a rancher. The Broken Compass Ranch had a new owner, but the real question was, did the ranch own him? Barron, standing at the highest point of the pasture, seemed to think the answer was yes. This is Bison Echoes, where the modern frontier meets ancient legends, where family legacy battles corporate greed, where a man, a teenage girl, and a 2,000-pound guardian learn what it means to protect what matters. Subscribe and follow this journey, because the Miller family's story is just beginning, and Barron has secrets to reveal. In the next episode, Jack tries to modernize with drones and GPS tracking, but when technology threatens the herd, Barron shows them that some wisdom can't be found in machines. And those mysterious tire tracks, they appear again, this time in daylight. The plains are calling. Will you answer? Bison Echoes. Subscribe now.